So I want to talk about the re-enchantment of the West and the concept of sacred space. So with the loss of magical practices, denounced as either unscientific or superstitious, the West also lost its magical shield. Indeed, our sacred space has been invaded by hordes of foreigners under the guise of equality and diversity. And I argue that we need to re-enchant the Western peoples and their lands as a crucial step toward warding off demons. So in a spiritual sense, sacred space is a piece of land that a priest has hallowed. All right, a priest has given this piece of land his blessings. So, fun fact, borders used to be sacred. When ancient farmers decided to convert a patch of land into productive soil, a magician or a priest would first circle the land, walk around it, and bless it or hallow its borders. This newly created patch of agricultural land was then considered magically separated from natural wilderness. For example, to ward off invasive insects and crop diseases. The modern movement against such borders constitutes a wholesale spiritual attack on the sanctity of exclusionary spaces. Such spaces that we can control and own are necessary for the survival of any people. Now, when Catholicism came to Europe, it relegated heathen magic to the realm of devil worship. Catholicism, however, did not deny that magic was real. The church merely tried to ban unwanted magic. Witches were burned, likely because the women were heathen seeresses or prophetesses and considered a threat to clerical power. I recently learned that 20 to 25% of the witches burned during Europe's witch hunts were actually men. There were also male witches. They weren't burned for being women. They were burned for posing a religious threat to the Catholic Church or even to the Reformation, to the Protestants. And then came the Protestant Reformation, which erased magic altogether in favor of the rational sciences. But if magic were harmless superstition, then why did Europe's profane rulers so aggressively hunt down and exterminate magic's practitioners? Surely the shamans and seeresses were thought of as a real threat against worldly power, not merely a cosmetic nuisance. And I think I know why. In heathen Europe, our brand of magic was commonly tied to the spoken word, much unlike the Asiatic shamans who practiced demonic possession while in a state of trance. You may have heard of this, that shamanism is not European. Shamanism comes from Asia. However, Europeans had a different kind of magic that focused on words, the spoken word. European magicians tended to exert power through this prophetic poetry, chants and spells and songs, i.e. the freedom of magic was as dangerous to political power then as freedom of speech is today. In a way, freedom of speech is the freedom to practice magical incantations. And although only a few people know how to wield words properly, those who do would have one immense influence. Free speech, like free magic, gives financially powerless individuals the power to influence political affairs. And that is dangerous. By purging magic, it was the Protestant Reformation that ultimately allowed for the Industrial Age to begin. The shift away from magic to religion under Catholicism, and then from religion to rationality under Protestantism, paved the way for exponential technological and economic growth. We hailed the newfound wealth the way Faust welcomed the devil, in exchange for knowledge, scientific knowledge. We sold our souls to economic regimentation. Magic today plays no overt role in advanced Western society. magical practices are looked down upon as children's fantasy. Now, German philosopher Martin Heidegger warned of such disenchantment in favor of thingness. "We have become mere matter," he wrote, "things, gears, and levers to be turned and pulled, rather than mortals. Only human beings are called mortals. Animals are not called mortals, and plants aren't either. We have become employees occupying a giant gas station called planet Earth." Heidegger also spoke of the de-godding, or the flight of the gods, Entgötterung, leaving humanity behind in a godless, calculative world, the modern world of so-called technological progress. But Heidegger and others saw technology as a threat. They accused Western man, in particular, of dominating the planet by holding Mother Earth captive through the use of machinery. Technology was man's victory over the Earth's resources, but at what cost? Technological dominance, in my view, also implies the loss of magic, which next exposed ourselves to primitive attacks. We've lost our reproductive vigor, for example. When we hail Poland's recent economic boom, we ignore that native Polish women are now having barely one child per woman, thus also opening Poland up for mass immigration and displacement. What is really the point of technological progress if it exhausts one's people? What is the purpose of generating wealth if it means to give it up to primitive invaders? Does technological progress distract us from living a more meaningful life? In James Cameron's Avatar cycle, the primitive blue creatures, guided by their spirit goddess Awa, which is an inversion of Yahweh, turn against the technologically superior humans whose endless growth economies have nearly destroyed their home planet. In reality, we don't need to wait for some alien species to come around and teach us such a lesson. Our technological prowess will run out of steam before we develop interplanetary space travel, which is, by the way, also highly unlikely, and I'll get to that in the next section. The lesson to be learned comes from Yemen's Houthi rebels, throwing sticks and stones, proverbially, at high-tech drones. Think of the modern, rich and powerful USA that is somehow unable to stop having its founding race from being replaced with low IQ, third world immigrants. When our magical defenses were broken down in favor of technology, we opened ourselves up for demonic destruction and deconstruction, I would say, as well as endless mass immigration, the invasion of our sacred space. It seems we have traded our spiritual energy away for temporary progress. Sapped and trapped, the sacred has been nearly devoured by the profane. We've sold our magic, our soul, to the devil, technology. This removal of the sacred shield that was meant to protect and preserve us was, in fact, the first step toward our mental, moral, and techno-masochistic decline. The Na'vi of Avatar's Pandora are strong because they still have their magic, whereas the humans are weak because they've lost theirs. And so it is in the real world here on Earth. In his book, Anglo-Saxon Magic, author G. Storms mentioned many of the sort of charms and spells that the heathen magicians of northwestern Europe once cast. Most of these spells relate to protective measures against disease or theft, and also against one's enemies. We find a good collection of spells in the Icelandic Galdra book, the Book of Magic. Though heavily Latinized and Christianized, the spells' intents were still heathen. By and large, the heathen Nordic Germanic magicians acted as spiritual generals and doctors, guarding the well-being of their people. Unlike modern politicians who protect shareholder value. So why did the West embark on this path, to give up magic for technology? Might one regard magic as a spiritual technology and modern technology as disenchanted magic. Why did Protestantism in particular favor technology over magic? Well, for starters, Protestantism is based on the Mosaic prophets of the Old Testament, Moses et al., whereas Catholicism is a New Testament Christianity based on ancient Egyptian magic. In a way, Protestantism is much more Jewish, quote-unquote, and mercantilist than Catholicism, which drove Jews out of the church around the 3rd century AD. When there is talk of Judeo-Christian values, rather a literary invention of the late 19th century, we are perhaps looking at a geopolitical instrument meant to help get American evangelicals behind support for Israel, their greatest ally. The two branches of Western Christianity, Catholic and Protestant, might as well be called different religions, and it's always surprised me that it's called one religion. For one half, the Protestant half, no, the Catholic half, still wields magic, and the other, the Protestant, denies magic is real. Importantly, Protestantism became the religion of the Freemasons. Catholics and women were initially barred from joining. Masonic lodges spread across the globe with the spread of the British Empire, and so Protestant Freemasons became the world's secret shadow elite, at least in the West. It has led some to comment that perhaps Protestantism was a Judeo-mercantilist invention meant to overthrow the still magically oriented Catholicism in Europe. Under the British Empire, this mercantilist empire, many national populations were subsequently converted into consumers and later into expendable assets. People were made into consumers. Remember what Heidegger said? He warned that technology would turn the whole earth into a standing reserve, a gas station meant for consumption. In The Wealth of Nations, 1776, Adam Smith summarized it as follows: to found a great empire for the sole purpose of raising up a people of customers may at first sight appear a project fit only for a nation of shopkeepers. He was referring to Great Britain. Smith called Britain a nation of shopkeepers, but failed to mention that the British elites at the time were influentially Jewish or had at least adopted Jewish-style mercantilism. It certainly weren't the heathen Celto-Germanics, the Anglo-Saxons, who had abandoned their magical ways in favor of global consumption and consumerism. Some alien people had turned Britain into a shop and would later turn America into a mall, the USA. Malls and shops are famously open to members of all races and religions. Magical boundaries, such as those once set by the ancient priests, were now considered economic nuisances. The world was forced to open itself up to commerce and trade, to the benefits of certain global elites. Subjects of the West, such as you and I, ceased being purposeful mortals and became products of the technological age. We became the product. No longer were we growing food to feed families, but rather we started breeding families in order to sell more food. We started diluting food's nutritional contents in order to sell more of it, while teaching people to drink more water to help them flush minerals out of their bodies, forcing people to eat more. In line with this, the Ozempic medicine, which is supposed to reduce one's fat contents, perfectly helps sell more food again. And then when you get off of Ozempic, you gain weight 4 times as fast as anyone else. Food has lost its magic. No longer is food a substance meant to nourish both the soul and the body. Modern food only nourishes the body, but barely, while depriving the soul. Selling more food and clothes and houses, as you will understand, became one of the drivers behind mass migration. Once poor nutrition killed the population's will to reproduce, mass immigration became required to continue the scheme. We need to put a stop to this development. What we need is an overturning of modernity. Icelandic language still betrays the importance of the magicians, who were called mächtigaste, or the mightiest of men. Though Iceland's magicians were generally considered lower class, namely financially poor, they were frequently literate. The history of Iceland's magicians shows that magic was not reserved to the elites, who sometimes practiced it, but to anyone with the right spiritual skill set. Throughout the pre-Christian European age, master magicians and high priests generally ranked above worldly leaders such as kings and princes, and only below the gods. The rich used to bow before their priest, and emperors needed their magician's approval for war. The peoples of the West need a spiritual renewal that begins with the embrace of magic. We cannot possibly defeat diversity and multiculturalism until a new generation of priests and magicians is allowed to hallow our borders and sanctify and sacralize our exclusionary spaces again. We shall fight globalism not with more technology, but with magical incantations. So that is the first part, the first section that I wanted to go through. There's another part coming up called Rediscovering the Sacred Space Where Our Souls Live. I was just talking about sacred space, and this is subtitled The Real Theory of Everything is Theology. By the way, you can find these articles on the reaction.org. It's my organization. I'm trying to start sort of political philosophy. It's basically founded on a new philosophy for the future, but we need a political organization on top of it to make these things come to life, to realize our goals, materialize everything. Too bad that I don't have that many viewers, but I think I'll just continue reading the second article, and then it's not as long, and then I'll do a little chit chat and wrap it up. I will upload this video to my YouTube channel and of course to the reaction.org website, where you will be able to find this podcast as well. All right. So I'm going to start with the second section here. So in my earlier section on Re-Enchanting the West, I introduced this notion of sacred space. Borders used to be sacred, I said, hallowed by priests. But the desacralization of our space that happened after the French and Industrial Revolutions closed heaven's doors, meaning it condemned humanity to hide itself within the cyberspace of modern technology, of the internet, for example, social media. And I think it's time for us to break out of these machines holding our minds captive. In 1999, BBC4's Melvyn Bragg hosted a podcast titled Space in Religion and Science with British theologian John Pilkinghorn and Australian science writer Margaret Wertheim. They had a lively debate about the meaning of this new thing called cyberspace. It was a place that early internet lovers said could perhaps one day host their souls. Back in the day, in movies such as Tron or The Lawnmower Man, the ancient cyberspace was being portrayed as a possible heaven for humanity, a place to transcend the limitations of our physical bodies, perhaps even to do away with physical reality altogether. I read a book about it called The Siren's Song, in Swedish, Sirenens Song, that is exactly about this, about how socialists and Marxists actually want to do away with physical reality, like deconstruct it. Some saw in cyberspace the potential to create a real heaven, since they don't believe in a heaven after death and an afterlife. They thought they were going to build a technological, mechanical heaven right here on Earth using technology. All right? So unlike what the four horsemen of militant atheism of the day, Dennett, Dawkins, Harris, and Hitchens, would call religious dogma that they didn't believe in. This was a time when people started fantasizing about the possibility of using computer technology to create new universes, to create our own heaven with the use of technology in the hands of an ordinary man. That was the goal. Men were going to be gods. We were going to create our own universe. We were going to live forever after uploading our minds to the internet, hosting our souls on data centers, coincidentally controlled by the job-creating capitalists. As a promise sold to us by commercial marketeers. You just had to imagine it, our own heaven. Replaying this 1999 podcast episode with Dr. Polkinghorne led to the awkward experience of first hearing the man speak vividly about the sanctity of space as a place for our souls, only to find out that the man deceased in 2021. What I was listening to was not the man's eternal soul uploaded to the heaven of the BBC's website, but rather an echo of a snapshot of his earlier existence on Earth, temporarily remembered by my internet search request. Early dreams of cyberspace have clearly not materialized by 2026. The internet is just a collection of digital copies of original works once produced by the living. The internet itself never gained such a life force that it might be called heavenly, not even with today's, at times, bumbling AI. Moreover, a review of robotic capabilities at technology event CES 2026 recently revealed that the most advanced robot technology is still largely stupid and incompetent and slow. The future was oversold and didn't deliver. In short, humanity is nowhere near creating a real heaven by using technology. All we've done so far is destroy and erase the idea of the old heaven, the religious heaven. We've desacralized the space our ancestors thought absorbed their souls after death, namely the space outside of Earth. That space has now become a place for physical exploration, no longer sacred. The space between the sun and moon is no longer mystical or mythical, but practical. The stars are no longer souls of kings and saints, but mere gas giants. The Milky Way is no longer a jet stream of the souls of humanity to be revered, but a place to boldly go where none have gone before, as in the feature film franchise Star Trek. There is a problem with conceiving outer space as mere physical space. According to several smart people's calculations, interplanetary, let alone interstellar space travel will never become practically feasible. Even if the required long-distance space travel technology one day becomes available, the material economics of energy and the logistics of multi-generational travel would still render it totally impossible to ever visit other worlds. Ed Regis, in his book Monsters on the Hindenburg disaster, calls interstellar space travel a pathological technology. This may provide the answer as to why a more advanced alien species has never visited our Earth yet. Even if these advanced others existed, they wouldn't be able to reach us, and neither will we ever be able to reach them. This makes the curious thinker wonder whether outer space is really real at all, and physical, since we can never explore it beyond the moon's orbit. And then there's this running conspiracy theory that says NASA staged its moon landings, in which case humanity has never even left Earth's nearest satellite orbit. Ed Regis wrote the following for the Scientific American. For a starship traveling at relativistic speeds, the speed of light, a collision with even a random small particle would have the effect upon the spacecraft of an H-bomb explosion. What then was the point of it all? In the annals of pathological technologies, there was no other idea that depended for its plausibility on such an extreme degree of juvenile aspiration, magical thinking, systematic denial, and sheer silliness than the imaginary technologies of interstellar flight. He's calling bullshit. 27 years ago, Polkinghorne and Wertheim already suggested to Melvin Bragg that people were getting tired of the reductionist materialism of modern science that says everything in existence in the universe is just mere matter in motion. People craved a space for their souls to live on. Materialism is coincidentally also Marxism's belief. For Marxism tacked itself onto the rational sciences of the mid-19th century in order to claim scientific legitimacy. Marxism, it said, was scientific, and everybody else's political belief was not. They still call you uneducated if you don't believe in socialism. By claiming science as its backer, Marxism won great appeal in international circles. Both Marxism and the emerging scientific worldview would, from then on, maintain that there is no free will, that people have no conscious minds, and that there was no God. Thoughts and feelings were just urine of the brain, mechanical byproducts of the brain's functioning. Since everything had already been set in motion by the Big Bang, there was no creativity, and everything was preordained. People were just meat robots. Our only salvation was progress towards some utopia. It's disturbing to see how this notion of utopia has been so quickly perverted to mean a space controlled and exploited by billionaire owners. A place to hold the souls of humanity captive at a commercial rate. The dream of immortality meant paying for one's subscriptions eternally. There would never again be a release from the duties of life. If you can live forever, you can pay your Hulu subscription every month forever. The virtual worlds of the internet and video games have, besides cinema, literature, and TV, offered people a new religious space that can be controlled, however, by the owners of the underlying technology. So that was the whole point. Do you get it? And what would these billionaire owners of humanity want to do with us? Would they want to blend all of our souls together into one in order to create a deus ex machina, a god or goddess from the machine? Today they call it artificial general intelligence. But you are the product. Online speech police here may serve to make sure that humanity's digitized souls remain together by enforcing coexistence and by deleting those whose opinions don't fit. Indeed, the technological heaven is a curated heaven, and hell is its Windows recycle bin. If you don't fit in, you will be deleted. But what speech police cannot prevent, however, is people logging off from the internet altogether, and once again seeking a true religious space outside of technology, a new sacred space. We don't need to imagine space travel across light years of distance in order to find our utopian salvation. We can find it right here on Earth. We find the space we're looking for already within our hearts and minds, or perhaps in our lungs, where our European ancestors thought our soul lived. When we must give our last breath, we shall realize that we shall release our soul and have it land among the stars beside the kings and saints of old times. It's time to reclaim this outer space and make it a place for our souls again.